She was 36 now, and she had not left those 3 acres in 14 weeks. Caleb Merritt had driven past the gate twice before he spotted the intercom box mounted on the stone pillar at the turn. He rolled down the window of his truck, a 2016 Ford F-150 with a cracked passenger mirror he kept meaning to fix, and never did, because fixing it required a morning he never seemed to have available, and pressed the button. The response came from a woman named Mrs. Fenwick, the housekeeper, who had the measured precision on the phone of someone who had spent years filtering out people who were not worth the trouble, and had developed the skill into something close to an art form. Merritt Restoration, Caleb said. She called about the window. North wing. A pause. She called about the north wing. She did not call about a child. Caleb looked at his daughter Rosie, who was 6 years old and currently occupied with drawing something on the back of a gas station receipt using the ballpoint pen she had found in the glove compartment sometime in the past week. She had her mother's brown eyes and her mother's absolute indifference to any tension that was not being directed at her specifically and by name. My regular sitter had a family emergency this morning, Caleb said. Rosie is quiet. She will not be any trouble. Another pause, long enough that he had time to wonder if this was going to fall apart. If Fenwick was going to say no and the job was going to go to someone else, and that meant a gap in the week he could not afford right now. May was expensive. Rosie's annual checkup had been last Friday. The property insurance renewal was due at the end of the month, and the leak in the shop bathroom he had been ignoring for 2 months had reached the point where ignoring it was no longer structurally responsible. Pull through, Mrs., Fenwick said. Park beside the garage on the north side. Do not go inside the main house without being shown through. The gate swung open. The north wing was accessible through a side entrance that had been designed separately from the main entrance, with its own ramp and its own covered approach. Details that told him someone had thought carefully about access when the house was built, or very shortly after. Mrs. Fenwick was waiting at the side entrance when he pulled up. She was a woman in her early 60s, silver-haired, with the composed, unhurried efficiency of someone who had organized her way through things that other people fell apart over and had never particularly taken credit for it. She looked at Rosie with a brief, neutral assessment, cataloging rather than judging, and then looked at Caleb. Miss Harmon is particular about her space, she said. Any questions you have about the work, you ask me. You do not knock on the office door. You do not speak to her unless she speaks first. Understood. Caleb glanced at Rosie, who had transferred her drawing project from the gas station receipt to a proper sheet of paper she had produced from her backpack, and was now sitting cross-legged on the gravel with the focused attention she gave things that interested her. The window is in the second corridor, Fenwick said. Custom frame, original to the build. A contractor replaced a pane last fall and used the wrong adhesive. The seal is compromised. Ms. Harmon wants the pane matched exactly, not close, exactly. The original cedar finish, the original glass weight. She led him through the side entrance into a space that was more workshop than hallway, built-ins running the full length on the left side, cedar detailing on the ceiling beams. A floor that was original wide plank walnut, worn to a color you could not buy. The kind of space that had been built with care at every level and showed it. The window in question was a 12-pane casement, original cedar, sitting in a frame that had aged to the color of good leather. The replacement pane was close but not right. A slightly different glass weight, a fraction cooler in the light. You had to know what you were looking at. Caleb looked at it for 30 seconds and knew. She will want a sample match before I commit to the replacement, he said. I will let her know. Fenwick paused. Where is your daughter? Caleb turned. Rosie had followed them inside without being invited or told not to, and was now standing very still in the corridor, looking at the window from a low angle. The way she looked at things when she was genuinely interested, rather than simply present. It is not level, Rosie said. Caleb looked at her. What? The frame. She pointed at the left side of it, the near side. That side is lower. The pane they put in is the same glass. See, the color is the same. But the frame moved, and they did not notice before they installed it. Caleb crouched and looked at the window from her vantage point. She was right. The frame had settled, shifted approximately 3 millimeters on the left side, probably during the contractor's work, either from the vibration of the removal or from the adhesive application putting uneven pressure on the sill. It was the kind of thing you would catch if you were looking straight across the frame at exactly the right height and exactly the right angle. It was the kind of thing a person standing at adult height, looking at the window straight on, would not see. "Good catch," he said. Rosie had already moved on. She was looking at the built-ins, one hand on the bottom shelf, her drawing paper tucked under her arm. "This is going to require frame adjustment before the pane replacement," Caleb told Fenwick. "If I match the pane without leveling the frame first, the visual discrepancy will still be there. It will be different from what it is now, but it will still read wrong. The whole frame needs to come back to level first, then I match the pane to that. How much time does that add? Half a day, possibly a full day. I will know better once I have the frame open." Fenwick nodded once. "I will update Miss Harmon." She went through the door at the end of the corridor. Caleb set down his toolbox and began the detailed assessment, checking the sill, the frame seating, the degree of the shift, what had caused it. Rosie found a corner near the built-ins, arranged herself in it with the natural economy of someone who understood exactly how much space she needed and never took more, and began drawing what appeared to be the window, frame, panes, the light coming through it, with the meticulous focus she gave things she intended to get right. It was Rosie who drew Celeste Harmon out of her office. He heard the door at the end of the corridor open. He looked up. He had read the brief Mrs. Fenwick had emailed before the job, because there was always a brief for a new client, and the brief had been more detailed than most. The client required certain protocols. Access was limited. The medical situation was as follows: spinal cord injury, T10 level, incomplete, following a vehicle accident. Sensation affected below the injury. Voluntary movement compromised. She used a wheelchair. The brief asked that all contractors understand and respect these facts before arrival. He had read it and not known what to expect. You rarely did. What he had not anticipated was the quality of her presence. She came through the doorway with the controlled, upright posture of someone who had decided that a wheelchair was not going to change how she occupied a room, how she entered it, how she held herself within it. The decision showed in every detail. Her hair was dark, pulled back with the care of someone who had not given up the details, even when the details required effort, even when there was no occasion that technically required them. She was wearing a gray blouse that probably cost more than his truck's monthly payment, and she had the kind of face that looked like it had once been comfortable with a certain expression, something open and aimed at things, and had since been rearranged into a different one. More contained, more deliberate, not closed, but controlled. She was looking at Rosie. Rosie was in the middle of explaining to Mrs. Fenwick, who had apparently still been in the corridor, why the window frame mattered to the drawing she was doing. "The left side is lower," Rosie was explaining, with the conviction of someone reporting a geographical fact. "You can see it from here, from this height. From up there you cannot tell, but from here you can." She was pointing at the floor, indicating the exact vantage point. Fenwick was giving Caleb the kind of look that communicated she was not certain how to handle a 6-year-old giving a technical briefing in a client's private corridor. Caleb was already moving toward Rosie to redirect when the woman in the wheelchair said, "She is right." Rosie turned. She looked at the woman in the wheelchair with the direct, unembarrassed attention that children had before the world taught them to manage it, to perform the careful non-noticing that adults deployed around anything that might make someone uncomfortable. Rosie had not yet been taught that. She looked at the wheelchair and at the woman using it with equal and undifferentiated curiosity. The way she looked at everything, as a thing that existed and was therefore worth understanding. "I know," Rosie said. "My dad said so too." Caleb straightened up. "Ms. Harmon, I apologize for the unexpected addition. I am Caleb Merritt. This is my daughter Rosie." He looked at Rosie with the brief, significant expression that meant, "Mind your manners." "Rosie, this is Ms. Harmon," Rosie said. "Hi then." With the direct honesty that was her most constant quality. "Did you get hurt?" "Rosie, it is fine," Celeste Harmon said. And there was something in the way she said it that was not automatic. not the reflexive response of someone shutting down a question they had been asked too many times. She looked at Rosie with something that was examining itself, turning itself over, deciding I was in an accident. Does your back hurt? Sometimes Rosie processed this with the thoroughness she brought to information she intended to retain. My dad hurt his shoulder last winter, she said. He said it made him feel like his arm was borrowed from someone else, like it was not really his. She considered. Is it like that? Caleb watched Celeste Harmon's face do something. Not quite a flinch. Not the protective management she used for most interactions. More like a door opening an inch. Not because she had decided to open it, but because the particular nature of the question had gotten through before the mechanism could engage. The door opened an inch and then caught on its frame. Something like that, she said. Then she looked at Caleb, and the door closed and the controlled professional expression was back, assembled fast and clean. My housekeeper says the frame requires leveling before the pane replacement. Yes, the settlement shifted the left side approximately 3 millimeters. If I match the pane without correcting it first, the visual discrepancy will remain, just different from what it is now. Can you match exactly? That is the goal. I will source a sample to show you before I commit to the replacement pane. You need to see the match in natural light, in this corridor, before I proceed. She nodded once. Clean, decided. Sample first. She looked at Rosie one more time. Just briefly, just a second, with the same quality she had worn when the door had opened an inch. Then, she has a good eye. She does, Caleb said. Celeste Harmon turned and went back through the door at the end of the corridor, and the door closed with a sound that was not harsh but was complete, and Caleb stood in the quiet of the north wing with his toolbox and his daughter and the morning's work ahead of him. He did not know, standing there, that he would be back the following week, and the week after that, and the week after that. He did not know that the window job would lead to an issue with the south porch drainage, and the drainage would lead to the cedar decking, and the decking would uncover a rot problem and 8 feet of structural beam that would put him in the north wing for 4 consecutive days. He did not know that the jobs would keep finding him the way jobs did in old houses, one problem leading to the next with the reliable logic of deferred maintenance, but also that they would keep finding him because, somewhere in the second week, Celeste Harmon had stopped having Fenwick relay messages about the work and had started appearing in the corridor herself. He did not know any of that yet. He knew only the window. He got to work. The frame leveling took the better part of the morning. The cedar was original, 40-year-old growth that had dried to a density you did not find in current lumber, and working with it required patience rather than force, the kind of work where the material told you what it needed, and you listened. He sourced the sample for the pane replacement from a specialty glass supplier 2 towns over, a place that stocked restoration glass in weights and finishes that matched period construction. The match was close, but not exact on the first try, and he went back and got a second sample before he was satisfied. He showed both samples to Mrs. Fenwick at the end of the day, along with the frame assessment documentation. She took them to Celeste Harmon and returned 20 minutes later with a single-word judgment. First, 1. He had chosen the first one too. He came back the following day with the materials and did the frame leveling first, which required pulling the entire casement from the wall, correcting the sill, resetting the frame, and reinstalling the casement with new sealant that matched the original in both chemistry and color. It was the kind of job that took twice as long as the visible end result suggested. The visible end result was a window that looked exactly as it should have looked for the past year. He was finishing the cleanup when Mrs. Fenwick appeared in the corridor. She would like to see it, Fenwick said. He stepped aside. A moment later, Celeste Harmon came through the far door and down the corridor to the window. She looked at it. She looked at it from the standard standing height approach, which was how most people would look at a window. Then she looked at it from low, from the angle Rosie had used on the first morning, from the vantage point that had revealed the problem. She said nothing for a long moment. "It is level," she said. "It is level." She looked at it for a moment more. "The pane match is very good." "Close," he said. "You will be able to tell in direct afternoon light if you are looking for it, but you would have to be looking." She looked at him. Most people would have said it was a perfect match. "It is not a perfect match," he said. "It is very close." She was quiet, looking at the window. Something moved in her expression that was not quite satisfaction and not quite the complicated thing she usually wore. Something simpler. "Thank you," she said. She went back to her office. He packed his tools and wrote up the window invoice and thought about the south porch drainage problem he had noticed while he was parked by the east wall. He thought about whether to mention it before she decided there was nothing left for him to do here. He mentioned it to Fenwick on his way out. He was back the following Thursday. The south porch job brought him back on a Thursday, 10 days after the window. He brought Rosie again because Mrs. Caldwell, his neighbor who watched Rosie on his workdays, had a cardiology appointment of her own that could not be rescheduled, and Rosie's school had a professional development day, and the choice was bring her or lose the job. He chose bring her. He called ahead. He told Fenwick at the gate. He heard a pause on the intercom. Then, "Come through." Rosie's operating protocol at Harmon Ridge, established on the first visit and never formally discussed, was this: find the corner with the best natural light, set up with minimal footprint, keep her materials in one defined space, and do not speak to adults who were not her father unless those adults spoke first. She had the kind of read on spaces that some children had naturally and some never developed. The ability to know, almost immediately upon entering a room, which rooms she was welcome in and which she was merely tolerated in and which she was expected to stay out of entirely. She navigated Harmon Ridge accordingly, moving through it with the self-contained ease of someone who understood that the privilege of being allowed there was conditional and worth protecting. The south porch drainage had been improperly sloped by whoever had done the original installation. The channel ran toward the foundation instead of away from it, which meant in wet weather the water pooled at the base of the east wall and wicked into the cedar panels. Caleb spent the first morning digging out and relaying a 40-foot section of drainage channel, working through compacted clay that was slow-going and hard on his back. Rosie set up in the covered section of the porch, which had a south-facing exposure that gave her good light even on an overcast morning, and began drawing the stone foundation wall in detail. She was on her third iteration of it, unhappy with the mortar lines in her previous attempts, and starting fresh, when Celeste Harmon came out the first time. She came to the railing of the porch and sat there, for perhaps 4 minutes, looking at the work in the trench, without saying anything. Caleb kept working. He did not look up. He was aware of her in the particular peripheral way he had developed over the first week. The way you became aware of a presence that generated a distinctive quality of stillness. She looked at the work. Then she went back inside. She came out a second time 40 minutes later, and this time she came around to where Rosie was set up. He could hear the conversation from where he was working, intermittently, through the ambient sound of the morning. He heard Rosie say, with the declarative authority she used for factual observations, "The mortar is 2 different colors. The old mortar and the new mortar. See? They put new mortar in 2 places, and it dried a different color." He could not hear what Celeste said back, because he was 18 feet away and working through a section of clay that required the kind of attention that made peripheral hearing unreliable. He heard Rosie's response, "I want to draw it so you can tell which is which. I want the old part to look older." A pause, and the sound of something being placed on the porch boards. "Ochre?" Rosie said, repeating the word carefully, the way she repeated new words she intended to keep. Then a longer pause. "Then, I only have brown and yellow in my set. Can I mix them to make ochre?" Caleb sat back on his heels for a moment and looked at the sky above the trench. By the time he walked back to the porch for another tool, Celeste Harmon was gone, and Rosie was at work with a color he had not seen in her pencil set before, something warm and dusty, and exactly occupying the territory between the brown and yellow she usually used. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Rosie held up a small tube of oil paint, the professional grade kind, the kind that indicated serious use rather than casual hobbyist use. She had some in her studio, she said, in the tone of someone reporting unremarkable fact. She said I could try it for the stone. Caleb looked at the paint, then at the door through which Celeste Harmon had presumably returned to the inside of the house. He thought about what it meant for a woman who had not left her property. In 14 weeks, and who had organized her entire domestic architecture around the minimization of contact and the maximization of control to produce a tube of professional-grade oil paint and offer it to a 6-year old she had met exactly twice. He decided not to examine it too closely. "Say thank you next time you see her," he said. "I already did," Rosie said, and went back to the mortar lines. The work continued. The drainage became the decking, as he had suspected it would when he first opened the trench and saw the moisture damage at the panel base. The decking became the beam when he pulled 3 boards and found the structural cavity behind the east corner post was compromised, a rot that had been developing for years, covered by the panel work. Not visible from any angle unless you were already in the cavity looking at it. 8 feet of primary beam needed to come out and be replaced, and the work required being inside the north wing structure for 4 consecutive days. It was during those 4 days that the character of his contact with Celeste Harmon changed. Not in any single dramatic way. In the gradual, accumulative way that things changed in spaces you return to repeatedly, the way a path changed with use. She worked in the room at the end of the north wing corridor. Through the door, which was sometimes open 2 or 3 inches, and sometimes not, he could hear the rhythm of her day. Phone calls in the morning, dense and focused. The kind where she was managing multiple things simultaneously, and the speed of her thinking was audible in the pace of her sentences. Keyboard work in the long midday stretches, with a quality of concentration that was not silence, but quiet. The kind that had purposefulness in it. Silences in the afternoon that were not rest. Not the relaxed quiet of someone who had stopped working, but the particular quiet of concentrated thought. He was always aware of when she was in the room and when she had moved elsewhere in the house. It was not a dramatic awareness. It was the same awareness he had of any workspace where someone's presence generated a distinctive atmosphere. She was in the room, or she was not. And the corridor felt different in each case. On the second day of the beam work, she came to the doorway of her office and stood there, the door open fully now, and watched him work for 7 minutes. He checked his phone at the beginning and end of it and calculated later. She did not say anything during those 7 minutes. He did not speak either. He worked. She watched. Then she went back to her desk. On the 3rd day, she came to where he was working. "You said 8 feet need replacing," she said. "Is that the minimum or the full extent of the damage?" "Full extent. I found clean wood at both ends, about 3 inches past where the rot stops." He held up the end of one of the removed sections to show her. Self-contained. Why did the previous contractor not find it? He considered the question carefully, because the honest answer had implications. He probably did not pull back far enough to see where it ended, he said. He did not want to find more work. It was not quite a question. He wanted to give a bid number he could win with, Caleb said. That is a different priority than giving an accurate assessment. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the removed beam section. Long enough that he looked up to see if she had moved away. She had not. "And you gave me the accurate assessment," she said. "I gave you what I found. You can always get a second opinion." She said nothing for several seconds. "I have had enough second opinions." He looked at her then. There was something in the way she said it, not the words, which were ordinary enough, but the particular quality of the exhaustion underneath them. The exhaustion of someone who had been receiving assessments from authorities for long enough that the word had lost its connection to meaning. 31 assessments. All of them official. All of them complete. All of them telling her the same thing. He did not ask her what she meant. He went back to work. That evening he was writing up his timesheet when she came through the corridor again. "How long until the beam replacement is complete?" she asked. "Tomorrow afternoon. Day after at the outside." She looked at the stripped-back section of ceiling, the exposed joinery, the structural bones of the house, visible for the first time since the build. "You work clean," she said. "I have had contractors here who left more mess than the job itself. I charge for cleanup," he said. "So it is in my interest." She almost smiled. He was getting better at reading the almost, the slight movement at the corner of her mouth that was the beginning of something she generally stopped before it could form. This one got further than usual. It lasted perhaps half a second. "Tomorrow," she said, and went back to her office. The things he learned about Celeste Harmon in those first weeks, he learned mostly without being told. Some of it from Fenwick, who had the particular quality of loyalty to her employer that expressed itself through careful, measured disclosures rather than silence. She would tell you the things you needed to know to do your job well, and nothing beyond that. And she watched to see how you handled what she gave you before she gave you more. Some of it from the rhythms of the house itself, which told its own version of its inhabitant if you were paying the right kind of attention. He learned that her working day began at 6 in the morning and did not end until past 9 at night, and that the schedule was not a natural rhythm, but a structure she had built, because structure was the thing that held the days coherent. He learned that the physical therapy sessions, 3 a week, conducted by a therapist named Gerald, who came to the house at 10 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, were harder than they looked from the outside. He knew this because of the quality of the quiet after them. Not the quiet of someone who had worked hard at something physical and was tired in the ordinary way. A different quiet. The quiet of something that had been pressed on and not yet released. The quality of air after a storm had passed. He learned that her older sister called every Sunday morning from Denver, and that the calls lasted between 40 minutes and an hour, and that Celeste's voice in those calls had a quality it had at no other time during the week. Something briefly unguarded. Something that sounded like the version of her that existed when no one was watching to see how she managed. He learned she kept a photograph on the windowsill in the north wing corridor in a plain frame, angled so it faced neither into the room nor fully away from it. He passed it every day he worked in that corridor. He did not ask about it. He could see enough to know it was a building under construction, scaffolding and steel, the early skeleton of something large, taken from below at a construction angle that suggested whoever took it had been standing on site, not observing from a distance. He did not ask. He waited. He watched and said nothing, and let the silence be what it was, which was its own kind of answer. The 6th week brought a change that was not announced and not explained, and he learned about it only from Fenwick, in passing. In the way Fenwick delivered things she considered important, but that were not properly his business, the physical therapy was being increased from 3 sessions per week to 5. Gerald was coming on Saturdays now. The specialist was reassessing the protocol. He did not ask what this meant. He understood enough from the atmosphere of the house in the 6th week to know that the intensification had produced a corresponding intensification in the quality of the afternoons. The house was harder in those weeks. Not unpleasant, harder, like something was being asked of it. He came into the corridor one Thursday morning to find that she had not gone to her office yet, which was unusual. She was at the far window, not the one he had fixed, but the matching window at the north end of the corridor, the one with the east exposure. She was looking at the morning light through it in the way she looked at things when she was not actually looking at them. He set down his tools quietly. He did not speak. "I have been having the same dream for 3 weeks," she said, without turning around. She had not heard him come in. She had heard him come in. "What is the dream?" "That I am somewhere I need to be, and I cannot get there fast enough." She paused. Not because of the wheelchair. Just, the distance is wrong. The place keeps moving. He thought about that. Where is the place in the dream? It changes. She turned from the window. She looked at him with the expression she was wearing more and more often. The one without the management. The one that was just her looking. "I know what it means. The therapy is going well, and I am afraid to believe it is going well." "Is it going well?" She was quiet for a moment. "Gerald says yes. The specialist says yes. The mapping data says yes." She paused. "I say yes, and then I wake up from the dream, and I am not sure what yes means." He nodded. He understood that quality, the space between the evidence and the belief, the gap where hope lived and was dangerous. "The evidence is in the yes," he said. "I know. The dream is just the part of you that learned to be careful a long time ago and has not received the update yet." She looked at him. "That is a specific way to put it. Is it accurate?" "Yes," she said. She turned back to the window. "Yes, that is accurate." He went to work. She went to her office. The morning continued. This was how it was now, the conversations arriving when they arrived, saying what they said, and then the day continuing as it would, as though the conversations had not cracked something open, and both of them were choosing not to name what had been cracked. There was a morning in the 7th week when Rosie was not with him. She was at school. It was a Tuesday. No reason to bring her. And the house had a different quality without her in it. Not worse, just different. He noticed it because Celeste noticed it. She came through the corridor at mid-morning and looked at his corner setup and looked at the empty spot where Rosie usually arranged herself. "She is at school today," he said. "I know," Celeste said. She looked at the spot for a moment. "She is drawing the East Garden next," she said. "She told me. She wants to do it in summer when the light is different. She has been thinking about that for 2 weeks," he said. "I know that too." She paused. "She tells me things when she is here. She tells everyone things when she is here," he said. "She talks constantly." Not constantly. Celeste looked at the window. The level window. The matched pane. When she is working, she is quiet. But when she takes a break, she talks. And she stopped. She is very observant. Yes, she notices things people do not usually tell children. She paused. She noticed that I have good days and harder days, and she adjusts what she talks to me about depending on which kind I am having. He had noticed that too, but he had not said it, because saying it would have made Rosie into a subject. And Rosie was not a subject. She was just who she was. "She has been reading rooms since she was 4, he said. "Where did she learn that?" He thought about it. After her mother died, he said, she learned that how people were on the outside was not always what they were on the inside. She learned to look at both. He paused. "She is better at it than most adults." Celeste was quiet. Her mother, she said. She was not pressing, just acknowledging. "Dana," he said. "Cardiac event." Rosie was 8 months old. The silence that followed was not empty. Celeste held it in the way she held things, with attention, without rushing to fill it. "I am sorry," she said. "Thank you," he said. He meant it. Not the way he had stopped meaning it years ago when people said it reflexively, but the way he had learned to mean it again when people said it and were actually present for the saying of it. She went back to her office. He went back to work. The morning was a little different after that. Not worse. Lighter, maybe. The particular lightness of having said a true thing and been received without it being made into more than it was. He asked eventually about the 30 doctors. It was a Friday afternoon in the 4th week, the last day of the decking and beam work, and he had finished ahead of schedule and was writing up his invoice at the workbench when she came through the corridor on her way to the therapy room. She stopped. "Do you have questions about the invoice?" she asked. "No. Do you?" "No." She looked at what he was writing, then at the window. Level now. The pane matched exactly. The frame corrected. "Are you done for the day?" "In a few minutes." She did not continue toward the therapy room. That was unusual. When Celeste Harmon was finished with a space or a conversation, she moved on from it with the decisive efficiency of someone who had never believed in lingering. She stayed. "Fenwick mentioned you asked about the scope before you took the job," she said. "The situation. I read the brief. I wanted to make sure the access requirements were manageable before I committed. Most contractors do not read briefing documents. Most contractors do not know what they are getting into," he said. "I prefer to know." She looked at him. "And now that you know?" "Same job," he said. "Different site." She turned that over. He had come to recognize this too, the pause she used when something required genuine consideration before a response, when she was not reaching for the ready answer, but looking for the true one. "The brief is 3 sentences," she said. "The rest I have figured out from being here," he said. "What have you figured out?" He chose carefully, because the margin was narrow and the measurement mattered, that you are working on getting better, and that it is taking longer than you expected. She said nothing. 30 doctors, he said. He was not sure what made him say it. It had been sitting in his mind since the brief mentioned it, and it had not left. That was in the brief. She looked at him sharply. "Fenwick, it was in the brief." He held her gaze. She put it there because she wanted contractors to understand that the situation was serious. I do not think she meant it as anything other than context. Celeste Harmon was still in the particular way he had learned to read, not the controlled stillness of management, but the stillness of someone who had just received something they were not prepared for and needed a moment to recalibrate. 31, she said, as of last month. He did not say he was sorry. She did not look like someone who had any use left for that sentence. What do they say? He asked. She looked at her hands in her lap. Her hands were still, which was, he had noticed, where her control was always most complete. That the injury is what it is. That I should focus on function rather than recovery. That the functional ceiling is where it is. She paused. That I should make peace with what I have and move forward from there. And you do not believe them. I believe them, she said. I just cannot seem to stop. She said it the way she said things that were inconvenient and accurate. Flatly, without performance, the way someone read a measurement off a gauge that was telling them something they did not want to hear but could not argue with. I believe them. I just cannot seem to stop. He understood that quality from the inside. The inability to locate the place where stopping lived, even when stopping might be the rational response. He had lived in that place for 3 years, in a different context, with different content, but the same basic architecture of it. He went back to his invoice. She continued toward the therapy room. He did not think about it again that day. He thought about it that evening, after Rosie was in bed and the house was quiet in the specific way houses were quiet, when the only person awake was the one who had nowhere to be and nothing urgent to do. He sat at the kitchen table with a beer he was barely drinking and thought about 31 doctors and the sentence I just cannot seem to stop and the window that had been not level and was now level and the 6-year-old who had seen it from the floor when no one else had thought to look. From there, he thought about the question he had not asked yet. Part 3. The external threat and what she said flat the board call arrived on a Tuesday morning in the 5th week, and he heard the edge of it because the office door was open 2 inches and she was working hands-free, the call on speaker while her hands were on the keyboard. He was in the corridor, 20 feet from the door, working on a detail of the beam installation he had needed to return and correct. He was not listening. He could not entirely avoid hearing. The man on the call had a voice he recognized by its register. The register of someone who had a difficult message to deliver and had chosen to deliver it under the cover of concern, using the language of care to transport something that was not care. Caleb had heard this register from contractors who needed to tell him a job had gone wrong, from people who wanted to ask for something they knew was unreasonable, but were hoping the softening would make the ask land more gently. It was the voice of diplomatic unkindness. The board's position has not changed, the man said. We respect everything you have built, Celeste. Nobody at the table is questioning your judgment or your record. But 6 months from active management is one thing. 14 months is a different conversation. A pause. Harrison is qualified, Celeste said. He has been running operations effectively for 3 years. The quarterly performance is there. Harrison is not you. The institutional investors know the difference. 2 of them have expressed concern about continuity of vision. They are not wrong to have it. They are expressing concern now because it is convenient, she said. The word convenient landed with precision, with the quality of something that had been thought about before it was said. Remington is behind this. A pause from the man's end. Shorter, more careful. I am not in a position to speak to that. That is a yes, Dale, Celeste, I understand the message. Tell the board I will have the Q3 projections reviewed and a written statement on the leadership transition timeline by Friday. The call ended with the clean click of a connection terminated. He heard the silence after it, a different quality of silence than the usual work quiet of the house. He kept working. He finished the beam detail. She came out 9 minutes later. He knew it was 9 because he had checked. She looked at him the way she looked at him when she had already completed the internal work and was bringing him the conclusion rather than the process. It was a recognizable expression now, over 5 weeks. The one that meant the thinking was done, and she was ready to say what the thinking had produced. You heard some of that, she said. Parts of it. It does not leave this house. It will not. She turned and looked at the window at the end of the corridor, the one they had started with, the one that was level now, The cedar frame matched and the pane set true. She looked at it without really looking at it. Someone on my board has been moving against me since the accident, she said. Not openly. He uses the board structure, the governance mechanisms, the language of fiduciary responsibility. He is patient and he is careful, and he frames everything as concern for the company. But what he is actually doing is using my absence as a lever. How long has he been doing this? Since the accident. 14 months. She paused. I have been managing it from here. But managing it from here is becoming untenable. He is not attacking my performance. The performance is not attackable. He is attacking my presence. And he is not wrong that the presence is the problem. Caleb set down what he was holding. So what changes it? Being there, she said. Her voice was flat, not emotionless, controlled, precisely controlled. The way you controlled something that would be difficult to contain if you loosened the hold. Being visible. In the room, in front of the institutional investors, not through Harrison and not over a call. My presence. Which requires me to leave. She stopped there. He did not prompt her. He waited. I have not left the property in 14 weeks, she said. I know. She looked at him sharply. Fenwick, no. He looked at her steadily. I noticed. The deliveries that come here instead of you going to pick things up. The appointments that come to you. The way the whole property is organized so that leaving is never necessary. He kept his voice level, without accusation in it. You built this place to be self-contained. Right now you are using it as something else. She was very still. I am not saying it as a criticism, he said. I know you are not. She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. It started as practical. The access logistics, the complexity of moving anywhere from here when you require certain accommodations. And then it became something else. What did it become? A silence. He waited, because pushing it would close it. When I am here, she said, I know exactly what I am working with. The distance between who I am now and who I was is a fixed distance. I have learned the edges of it. I know where everything is. She paused. Out there, that distance is not fixed. It changes depending on who is in the room, what they know, how they respond when they figure it out. Her hands were still. 31 doctors. Not one of them looked at me the way they looked at me before the accident. Every one of them, even the kind ones, even the brilliant ones, looked at me differently. She stopped. I stopped wanting to be looked at differently. He heard what she was saying and what she was not saying, and the unspoken part was heavier than the spoken. The property was not only a refuge from the logistical complexity of access, it was a refuge from evidence, from the continuous, accumulated daily evidence of what had changed. Here, she knew the distance. Out there, the distance was always new. What would it take to leave for a day, he said, a reason strong enough to make the distance worth it? What kind of reason? The kind that changed something real, she said. Not a board meeting, not a quarterly review, something that rewrote the equation. He thought about the question he had been carrying for 3 weeks. He had been carrying it the way you carried something whose weight you were still calculating, not yet sure if you had the right to put it down. Can I ask you something about the injury? He said. You can tell me it is none of my business. She met his eyes. Ask. The doctors who have assessed you over the past 30 months. When they do their assessment, where do they start? She did not move. The imaging. The original scans from the accident. And then, the injury site. The damage level. Secondary assessment from there. They always begin with the imaging. Yes, does any of them begin with what you can do? He held her gaze. Not what the imaging says, not what the damage report says, what you can actually feel. Today, what has changed since the last time anyone asked? What your body is actually doing, rather than what the record says it should be doing. She was very still. The corridor was quiet. He could hear the house settling, the distant sound of Mrs. Fenwick somewhere in the main wing, the wind in the cedar outside. He did not look away. None of them, she said. No? They compare me to the imaging, she said. Her voice had the quality of someone maintaining a very precise control over something that had considerable pressure behind it. Not to myself. Not to what I reported 3 months ago or 6 months ago. To the imaging. He said, "That is the question." He said it quietly. More to himself than to her, or maybe to the space between them that had been accumulating weight for 5 weeks. That is the question. Why has no one asked what you can feel today? Why does every assessment begin with the ceiling instead of the floor? Why 31 doctors and none of them started where you actually were? Celeste Harmon sat in the corridor with her hands in her lap and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "I can feel more than the first assessment indicated." He waited. He did not prompt. He waited. "I have never told any of them that," she said, "because when I have tried to say it, they redirect me to the imaging. They say sensation is unreliable and incomplete injuries. They say subjective perception of improvement does not correlate with objective functional outcome. They say the imaging is the ground truth." She looked at the window. So I stopped saying it. How much more can you feel? I cannot quantify it accurately. Can you describe it? She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone arriving at a decision. Not about trust that had been building since the first week, through the corridor conversations and the way he worked and the way he had not made a thing of Rosie being there. About whether the saying of it was worth the cost of saying it. About whether this was one of the things she kept inside because saying it cost something, or one of the things that needed to be said. The left side is different from the right, she said. The left side was always more affected, the imaging showed more damage on that side, the specialists explained it as the nature of the impact. But in the last 4 months there are moments when I can feel the floor through my left foot. She paused. Not reliably, not on demand, not consistently. But it happens. I will be sitting at my desk or in the therapy room, and I will be aware of the surface under my foot in a way I have not been in 30 months. She stopped. I have never told anyone that. Why not? Because hoping for the wrong thing costs more than not hoping, she said. And there was nothing performing in her voice now. No management of register, no temperature control, nothing between her and the sentence. Just the thing underneath it, which was tired and honest, and had been waiting for a long time to be addressed directly. I learned that in the first year. Every specialist who said maybe and then the maybe did not hold. 31 doctors. Most of them kind, several of them brilliant, all of them looking at the imaging and telling me what I could expect. She met his eyes. None of them asked me what I could feel. He did not say he was sorry. He had decided before the conversation began that he was not going to say that. There is a specialist in Memphis, he said. She works specifically with proprioceptive assessment and spinal cord injuries. She found what 2 hospitals had missed in my cousin's case, a motorcycle accident 6 years ago. Both hospitals had assessed and concluded the injury was complete, permanent, no meaningful recovery possible. She found preserved pathways they had never mapped because they were working outward from the damage rather than inward from what remained. He paused. She starts with the patient, not the imaging. Celeste Harmon looked at him. I am not telling you what to do with that, he said. I am telling you someone has asked the question. She has. The mid-story setback came 3 days later through the board member she had named on the call. Remington. It arrived through a motion filed through the board governance structure requesting a formal review of the CEO succession timeline. The motion was not an attack. It was more elegant than an attack. It was a mechanism, a process that once initiated. Put the question of Celeste Harmon's active engagement formally on the record and formally before the institutional investors, without anyone being required to say directly that this was what it was doing. It created a structure in which her absence was the question on the table. It was the kind of move that took patience and knowledge of process, and it had clearly been waiting for the right moment. She explained this to him on the Thursday when the motion was filed. She had come out of the office an hour after the formal notification arrived and found him in the corridor and explained it with the precision she brought to things that required precision, and without the emotion she might have been expected to show. Because the emotion was below the surface of it, and she had decided long ago that the surface needed to be reliable. It is a procedural mechanism, she said, not an attack. He knows better than a direct attack. This creates a structure in which the question answers itself. If I resist the review, the resistance looks like there is something to hide. If I accept it, the question is formally open for however long the process takes. How long does the process take? 8 to 12 weeks. And during those 8 to 12 weeks, the institutional investors are watching to see what a governance review of an absent CEO produces. She held his gaze. I have not been absent. I have been present in every way that actually matters to the company's performance. But what Remington is selling them is not the performance numbers. It is the narrative. The narrative that absence looks like absence regardless of what the numbers say. Yes. He thought about it. He needs the narrative to land before you can change it. Yes, so you change it first. She looked at him. The governance review cannot be withdrawn without his agreement, which he will not give. But it can be contextualized. If the institutional investors hear from me directly, with the full performance picture, before they hear Remington's framing of the review lands differently. She paused. I have the calls scheduled for this afternoon. You already knew what you needed to do. I knew what I needed to do, she said. I needed to say it out loud to someone who was not Harrison, or Dale, or Fenwick. She looked at him steadily. You are the person I say things out loud to. He thought about that for a moment, about the corridor and the weeks in it and the way things had been said and not said and said eventually. I know, he said. Is that a problem? No, he said. It is not a problem. She held his gaze for a moment, and the expression she was wearing was the unguarded one, the one he had started to recognize as the version of her that existed when she had stopped managing what was visible. Then she went back to her office to make the calls. She came out of her office, and she was not composed in the usual way. She was something that, in another person, might have been visible agitation. In her it expressed itself as a quality of control that was doing more work than usual. A tautness in it, like a structural element underload it was not designed for. He filed a formal governance review request, she said. Through the board process. It is within his procedural rights. It cannot be easily blocked without looking like I am avoiding scrutiny, which is exactly the impression he wants to create. What does it do? It puts the succession question formally in front of the institutional investors. It requires a formal response from me, and a formal response from a CEO who has been managing her company remotely for 14 months, who has not been physically present at a board meeting in 14 months, who has been here. Caleb set down what he was holding. What stops it? My presence at the governance review, she said. In the room. In front of the institutional investors, not through Harrison, not over a video call. My presence, which means I need to leave. The silence had a shape to it. I know what you are going to say, she said. Do you? You are going to say this is the reason strong enough to make the distance worth it. Is it? She did not answer right away. She looked at the photograph on the windowsill, the building under construction, the scaffolding, the angle from below. She looked at it for a long moment, and he understood, watching her, that she was not looking at the photograph, she was looking at something it pointed to. A version of herself standing in the dirt of a construction site at 27, holding a camera, looking up at the bones of the first thing she had built. With 3 investors and a temporary office lease and absolutely no certainty about whether any of it would work. The building in that photograph, he said. What is it? She turned to look at him. He had not expected that to land the way it did, the unpreparedness in her expression, the door opening further than she had meant. The first building my company built, she said. I took that photograph the day the scaffolding went up. I was 27. She paused. I had 3 investors who were not certain they had made the right decision, a lease on temporary office space, and no certainty about any of it. But you went anyway. I had already signed the lease, she said. That is not why you went. She looked at him. You went because the building mattered more than the risk, he said. That is what the photograph is. A silence. Long. The kind that had weight. Yes, she said, that is what it is. She looked at the window. Level now. Corrected. The pane matched and the frame true. Then she looked at him. I am going to the governance review. He nodded. She was already organizing it. He could see the shift happen, the executive mind engaging, the specific focus that came over her face when she moved from deciding to executing. I will need the Q3 package ready. I will need Dale to confirm the date. I will need Gerald to clear the Thursday session so I can travel. She paused. And I will need Fenwick to arrange transport and access at the venue. I can come back Friday, he said. The east fence section will keep. She looked at him. Something in the look, not gratitude, not the assessment look, not the controlled professional one, something older than all of those. The look of someone who had been carrying something alone for 14 months and had just registered, fully, that they were not entirely alone. Friday, she said. She went back to her office. He heard the first call start 20 minutes later. He was at a job on the other side of town when she left the property for the first time in 14 weeks. He was repairing a porch on a Victorian in the older residential section, Rosie at school that day, working through the morning sun with the focus that detail work required, when his phone buzzed. He checked it at the morning break. The text was from the number he had been given for Harmon Ridge job-related emergencies. It said, "Through the gate." Still going. He sat on the tailgate of his truck in front of the Victorian and read it twice. He felt something that was not quite relief. Not quite anything he had a ready word for. Warm, solid, not dramatic. He texted back, "Drive carefully." She texted back, "I have a driver. I am not driving." A pause. Then, "Thank you for the question." He put his phone in his pocket and went back to work. The governance review meeting ran 4 hours. Mrs. Fenwick reported this to him the following morning in her precise, information-dense way, without editorializing, but with the quality she brought to things she considered significant. The motion had failed. Remington's procedural mechanism had been neutralized. Celeste Harmon had been in the room, present, herself, not in proxy, not remote, and the presence had been the argument. The institutional investors had asked direct questions and received direct answers from the person who had built the company and knew every number in it. The succession timeline remained at her discretion. She came home Thursday evening, and he was still at the property finishing a section of east fencing he had started that morning. She came through the side gate and saw him and stopped. "How did it go?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her begin to assemble the professional expression, the managed version, the contained version, and then, for the first time he had witnessed directly, let it go before it fully formed. Let the assembling process stop before it completed. "It went," she said. "Was it worth it?" She thought about this with real seriousness, not the performed consideration of someone buying time before the expected answer, but actual thought. Yes. A pause. More than the board outcome. The rest of it. She looked at him. Being in that room. Being me in that room. Not the CEO who had an accident. Just the CEO. She stopped. I had forgotten what that felt like. To be in the room? To be me in the room, she said. The accident did not change my mind. It did not change what I know or how I think or what I have built. But for 14 months, every room I was in reminded everyone in it of what had changed. And that reminder became the thing they were looking at instead of me. She paused. Thursday. Nobody looked at anything except the presentation and the numbers. He nodded. She said, "I made an appointment. In Memphis. Next week." He did not say anything. "The specialist you mentioned," she said. "I found her published work. Her assessment protocol is entirely different from anything I have had. She begins with proprioceptive mapping, current subjective experience first, and works backward to the imaging to interpret it. Not the other way." She held his gaze. "You asked the right question. You had the answer," he said. A pause with the particular quality of those that meant something was being measured carefully before it was said. "My father used to say the right question was worth more than 100 wrong answers," she said. He said most people were so busy answering that they never checked whether they were answering the right thing. He sounds like he was wise. He was difficult and occasionally brilliant, she said, with something in her voice that was fond and old at once. The complicated warmth of someone speaking about a person who was gone and had never been simple. He died the year before the accident. I still have conversations with him in my head when I am working through something hard. She seemed briefly surprised to have said this. That is not something I have told anyone. I will not repeat it. I know. She looked at him steadily, and the steadiness had no evaluation in it. I know that about you. Rosie appeared at the end of the corridor. She was carrying something rolled and secured with a strip of masking tape, a large sheet of drawing paper, the kind from her good pad, the pad she reserved for things she intended to keep. She had been working on it for days, he knew. Coming to Harmon Ridge each time with her sketchbook and her pencils and the small tube of ochre paint that had been returned and reloaned more than once, building something she had not shown him. She crossed the corridor to Celeste and held it out with both hands. It is for you, she said, because you let me draw it. Celeste Harmon took the rolled paper carefully and unrolled it. She unrolled it slowly, the way you unrolled things you intended to see rather than simply open. It was the house. The whole property, the stone facade with its coarse details, the cedar beam work over the entrance, the corrected window frame in the north wing rendered with the frame level, the way it had looked after the correction rather than the way it had looked when Rosie had first noticed it was wrong. The east garden she had spent 2 full afternoon sessions mapping. The stone wall with its old and new mortar in 2 distinct colors, rendered exactly as she had wanted them when she had first borrowed the ochre paint. The south porch with the new decking boards in place, the scar lines where new wood met old clearly visible, drawn in without apology or concealment. She had drawn it as a place that had been through things, as a place where the evidence of what had happened was not hidden or smoothed over but present, the mortar in 2 colors, the window frame level after being fixed, the boards where the old rot had been taken out and something new had been put in its place. She had signed it in the lower right corner, small and careful, R. Merritt, age 6. Celeste Harmon looked at the drawing. She looked at it for a long time. He watched her look at it and said nothing. You drew the scar lines, she said. Rosie looked at where she was pointing, the south porch section with the new boards. Yes, from where the new boards met the old. Why? Rosie looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated attention that was her most constant quality. Because they are there, she said. If I leave them out, the drawing is not true. Celeste Harmon looked at the drawing for another moment. Then she looked at Rosie, not with the controlled assessment she usually brought to encounters, not with the almost expression she occasionally allowed through before calling it back. This one was unguarded in a way he had not seen from her. It had come through while she was looking at the drawing, moved past the management before it could be caught, and she either had not noticed or had decided not to call it back. Can I put it somewhere? Rosie asked. Somewhere it can be seen. A drawing has to be seen, or there is no point in it. Celeste looked at Caleb for a moment, brief, sideways, with the quality of someone checking a calculation, and then looked back at Rosie. There is a wall in my office, she said. It has been empty since I moved in. I have never known what to put there. Rosie nodded with the satisfied efficiency of a problem identified and solved. A house needs a picture of itself, she said. You are right, Celeste said. It does. Rosie transferred the drawing with the care of someone completing an important transaction. Celeste took it with the same care. He watched his daughter and thought about the photograph on the windowsill, the scaffolding, the angle from below. The day the first thing built had gone from idea to structure. He thought about the wall that had been empty and the drawing that was going to fill it, and the scar lines in the drawing, and the fact that Rosie had not needed to be asked whether to put them in. She had put them in because leaving them out would have made the drawing untrue. The week after Celeste left the property for the governance review and came back with something different in her expression. Not the same expression. A version of it that had been somewhere it had not been before. Things between them changed again, the way they had been changing incrementally since the first week, each change small and unmistakable. She started asking Rosie about her drawings. Not the way adults usually ask children about their work, with the performed enthusiasm that was really a performance of engagement rather than engagement itself. She asked specific questions about the choices Rosie had made and the choices she had considered, and why one thing instead of another. about the ochre mortar and whether Rosie was satisfied with how it had dried on the paper, about the window frame and whether she intended to draw it after the leveling or before and why. Rosie answered these questions with the seriousness they deserved, because they were serious questions asked seriously, and she could tell the difference. The conversations between them, when they happened, had the quality of two people who were genuinely interested in the same subject, and were finding that out. Rosie drew. Celeste asked questions. Caleb worked and listened and said nothing, because nothing was required from him. The drawing that became the gift on the wall had started 3 weeks before Rosie finished it. He knew because he had seen the sketchbook pages, the compositional studies, the proportion sketches, the tests of individual sections, the 3 full attempts before the final version that she had discarded as not quite right in ways she could not always articulate but recognized when she saw them. She had been building toward it the whole time, visit by visit, accumulating what she needed to make it true. He thought about that a lot in the days after the drawing went up on the wall. The way Rosie worked, accumulating evidence, building a picture piece by piece, not starting with the whole until she knew enough about the parts to draw the whole honestly. Starting from what was actually there. He thought about the question he had asked and where the question had come from, not from expertise. From the same place Rosie's drawings came from, starting at the floor and looking up rather than starting at the ceiling and trying to understand the distance down to where things were. He called his cousin in the second week of April, the one who had been in the motorcycle accident, the one whose case had led him to the Memphis specialist in the first place. He had not talked to him since before the job at Harmon Ridge began. He called now. The Memphis doctor, Caleb said. Dr. Crane, you still in contact with her? For follow-ups, yeah. Why? Someone I know. Similar situation. I recommended her. And I think she is going to make an appointment. He paused. I wanted to know what to expect, what it was like. His cousin was quiet for a moment. He had the quality of a person who had been through something significant and had come out the other side and was careful about how he talked about what it had been like in the middle. The first appointment is a long one, he said. She does a full proprioceptive mapping. It takes most of a day. And it is uncomfortable, not the mapping itself, but what she finds. What do you mean? She tells you what is there that no one looked for before, his cousin said. And that is good news. But it is also 20 months of knowing there was something there that no one told you about, and that is. He stopped. That is hard to sit with. Yeah, Caleb said. Your person. Is she going to be okay with that? He thought about Celeste Harmon in the corridor on the day she had said 31 doctors, and I just cannot seem to stop. He thought about the controlled voice and the uncontrolled thing underneath it. He thought about the door opening an inch and catching on the frame. She is going to be exactly as okay with it as she is, he said. Which will be enough. His cousin laughed, brief and genuine. Fair enough, he said. The Memphis appointment was on a Friday. He did not ask her about it before she went. She had told him it was scheduled, and that was enough. It was her decision and her process, and his asking would have been about his need to know rather than about anything she needed. He let it be hers. She texted him from the parking lot outside the clinic before she went in. It said, Here. Going in. He texted back, Good. She texted back nothing for 8 hours. Then, at 4:15 in the afternoon, the call. He had been at the house in the old neighborhood, Rosie back from school and at the kitchen table with homework. The afternoon at the point where it was quiet enough to hear the phone ring from the other room. He went to the other room and answered it. She found something, Celeste said. The rest of that conversation, and the months that followed, belonged to both of them and to Rosie, and to the house on Sycamore Creek Road, and to the specialist in Memphis, and to 31 doctors who had done their best with what they knew to look for, and to the particular question that had been waiting at the bottom of 5 weeks of corridor conversations for someone to finally ask it from. The right angle. From the floor. The way his daughter had looked at the window on the first morning, from the place that let you see what was actually there. The scaffolding, the angle from below, the day the first thing built had gone from idea to structure. He thought about the wall that had been empty since the house was finished, and the drawing that was going to fill it. He thought about the scar lines that were in the drawing, because leaving them out would have made it untrue. He thought about Memphis, about what the specialist might find. about the question that had been there all along, waiting for someone to ask it from the floor. Part 5. The recovery of the call came on a Wednesday morning, and she used the phone rather than the text. She had not called him about anything that was not a job-related question before. This was not a job-related question. She found something, Celeste said. Her voice was controlled in the way it was always controlled, and the control was covering something that was working harder than usual to remain covered. The proprioceptive mapping. She found preserved pathways on the left side that have never been assessed. The sensation I described, the floor through my foot. She said it is real. She said it is documentable. She said there is a protocol. He was in his driveway, Rosie inside having breakfast, the morning just starting. He did not start the truck. He sat still and listened. She said 31 assessments all began with the T10 imaging from the initial injury, Celeste said. The imaging showed the damage accurately, but it did not show everything that was not damaged. And every assessment worked outward from the damage, which meant anything preserved below the primary injury site was, she stopped. She used the phrase functionally invisible, not absent, invisible, because no one was looking. The difference between absent and invisible. He held that. What is the protocol? He asked. 18 months. Beginning with detailed sensation mapping to establish a current baseline, not the baseline from 30 months ago, a current baseline. Then proprioceptive training to reactivate neural pathways that have been unused. Then, eventually, she used the word carefully, potentially weight-bearing on the left side. She paused. She was very precise about what she did not know. She did not promise. She said the pathway integrity she found gives her reason to try. Are you going to do it? He asked. A silence, the kind with a shape. I have been sitting here for an hour, she said, trying to understand what I am afraid of. A breath. I think I am afraid of being wrong again. Of the maybe not holding. What does it cost to try? Everything it always costs, she said. Her voice was raw in a way it had not been before in any conversation with him. No management, no register, nothing between her and the sentence. Just the thing itself. The hope, the work, the 18 months of it. And then the possibility that at the end of it the ceiling is exactly where 31 doctors said it was. She paused. And I spent 18 months on the wrong side of that ceiling. And if you do not try. Another silence. Longer the ceiling is where they said it was, she said. And I knew there was a door I never opened. He waited. I am going to do it, she said. I am going to call her back today. I wanted to tell someone first. Someone who knew how I got here. I am glad you called, he said. A pause. Caleb, yeah, why did you ask that question? He thought about it honestly. Because Rosie looks at things that way. She does not start with what something is supposed to look like. She starts with what it actually is. He paused. It seemed like no one had done that with you. Started with what you could actually do and worked from there. A silence that was full rather than empty. No, she said. No one had. 18 months is a long time and not a long time. The difference depends on what you are measuring it against. The protocol was hard. She did not pretend otherwise. Not to him, not to her specialist. Not in the way she talked about it when she talked about it at all, which was more than she had talked about the previous 30 months of trying. Because the previous 30 months had been organized around not talking about it, and this was different. She called him on a Tuesday in the 3rd month. It was not a planned call. She did not call planned calls. Planned calls were scheduled and conducted with an efficiency that left no room for the kind of thing that needed to be said at 10:30 on a Tuesday night when the house was quiet and she had been awake for 2 hours. The resensitization is worse today, she said. He had been awake too. He did not mention this. How much worse? It is not pain exactly. It is more like the nerves are getting very loud about things they were not saying before. She paused. It is not comfortable. What does Dr. Crane say about it? That it is normal. That it means the pathways are activating. That the discomfort is the signal, not a warning sign. Another pause. I know it is not a warning sign. It still does not feel good. No, he said. It would not. I am calling because I do not want to call the specialist at 10:30 at night for something she has already explained. And I do not want to call my sister because my sister will worry, and her worrying will require energy I do not have right now. She paused. I called you. I know, he said. I am glad you did. I am not asking for anything. I know that too. The line was quiet for a moment. He could hear the house through the phone, the particular quality of quiet that a house had at night when the person in it was awake. I was thinking about the mortar lines, she said. He waited. Rosie drew them in 2 colors, old and new. The way the old mortar and the new mortar dried differently, even if you used the same mix, because the old had been through more seasons. She paused. I have been thinking about what I feel right now as the new mortar, before it has dried, before it has been through any seasons. He thought about this. It takes time to become the same color as the old. Yes, she said, but it eventually does, if you let it season. You are going to let it season, he said. Yes, a breath. I am going to let it season. That was the Tuesday call. There were other calls, not every night, not with any pattern he could predict. They came when they came, and he answered them, and on the nights when she did not call, he was aware of the not calling in the specific way you were aware of things you had become accustomed to. The protocol produced other moments that were harder than the resensitization. There was a day in the 4th month when the sensation mapping session showed no progress from the previous session. The first plateau, the specialist had called it, and had explained that plateau were part of the process, that neural retraining did not move in a straight line. Celeste had heard this and understood it cognitively, and was on the phone with him an hour later in the parking lot of the clinic, not asking for reassurance and needing it anyway. In the particular way, you needed the presence of a voice that knew the whole shape of things. Tell me about Rosie, she said. He told her about Rosie, about the new drawing she had started, the interior of the North Wing corridor, which she had been wanting to attempt for weeks, because the light in the corridor in the late afternoon was something she found interesting and had not yet figured out how to render. About the argument they had had that morning about whether she was required to eat the egg in her breakfast, and his position that she was in fact required, and her position that the egg was unfairly positioned relative to the toast. About the book she was reading, a library book about how caves formed, which she had been reading at bedtime for 2 weeks, and which had led to a sustained interest in limestone that he had not anticipated. He heard Celeste's breathing change. Not calm exactly, but steadier. She is a remarkable person, she said. She is, he said. She gets it from somewhere. He said nothing. I know you are not going to say it, she said. I am saying it. He let it sit. Caleb, yeah, thank you for picking up. Always, he said. The 5th month was the month of the setback. Not a medical one, the protocol continued its uneven, real progress. A different kind. Remington had not accepted the governance review defeat quietly. He had found a different mechanism, a proposal to the institutional investors requesting a formal audit of the company's management structure over the previous 18 months. The language of the proposal was scrupulously neutral. The intent was not. She called him about this at 7 in the morning, which was early enough that Rosie was not yet up. He is patient, she said. I will give him that. He went quiet for 4 months, and I almost let myself believe it was over. Almost, Caleb said. Almost, she said. I knew it was not over. I kept watching. A pause. The institutional investors have the right to request the audit. I cannot block it without it looking exactly like what he wants it to look like. What does the audit find? Nothing, she said. The management record for the past 18 months is clean. Harrison has been doing exactly what he should be doing, and I have been providing the strategic oversight I said I was providing. The numbers are there. She paused. But the audit takes 8 weeks, and 8 weeks is 8 weeks where the question of the management structure is formally open, and Remington will use every one of those 8 weeks. What do you need? To be ahead of it, she said. To make the first call to the institutional investors before Remington makes his. To be the one who frames what they are looking at. So make the calls today. I am making the calls today. A pause. I called you first. Then go, he said. Make the calls. She did. He found out later from Fenwick that she had reached all three key institutional investor contacts before Remington's follow-up communication arrived in their inboxes. She had framed the audit as a routine governance update she had herself requested, which was not technically false. She had not formally objected to it. She had sent the preliminary performance data along with the call. She had done what she always did when someone tried to take the narrative from her, which was to take it first. Remington's subsequent communications to the investors, arriving in the context she had already set, landed differently than he had intended. The audit happened. The audit found nothing. Remington resigned from the board in the 8th month, citing personal priorities, which was the language people used when the position had become untenable and they preferred an exit to an escalation. She told Caleb about the resignation in a text. It said, "He is gone." The audit cleared. "I did not tell you it was over when I was not sure." He texted back, "Is it over?" She texted back, "Yes." He texted back, "Good." She texted back, "Yes." The calls continued after that, but with a different quality. Less about the hard nights, more about the regular ones. About the protocol progress, which moved forward with the particular uneven forward motion of things that moved because of sustained effort rather than luck. About the company, which she was running with the same capabilities she had always had, just from a position that had changed and was continuing to change. About Rosie, who had graduated from the limestone book to a book about sedimentary rock formations and had developed opinions about the geological timeline that she was willing to share with anyone who would hold still long enough. About the things that did not need a reason to be talked about. The things that were simply the texture of days, reported to someone who was interested in the texture. Months 7 through 14 had a quality that was different from the earlier months. The protocol had moved past the acute resensitization phase and into what Dr. Crane called consolidation, the long middle stretch where the neural pathways that had been reactivated were stabilizing, where the sensation mapping was showing consistent results rather than variable ones, where the work was less about discovering what was there and more about building the strength and reliability of what had been found. She walked into a board meeting in the 9th month on her own terms, her own schedule, for a reason she had chosen rather than a reason someone had forced her to. She came back from it and called him. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me. I was in the room today and I was thinking about the question you asked me, the one about what I could feel." She paused. "I was sitting in the board meeting and I was thinking about how the imaging had been the starting point for 31 assessments, and how the imaging had shown the ceiling and everyone had worked from the ceiling down and never thought to start from the floor." She paused, and I realized I had been doing the same thing. For 14 months, starting from the ceiling, what I could not do, what was gone, and working from there. He waited. "The question changed the direction," she said. "Not the answer, the direction. Starting from what was actually there and working up from it." A pause. "I have been doing that in the boardroom now. Starting from what is actually there instead of from what I cannot do anymore. And it is." She stopped. "It is different.